built, and the Regate Squire's puzzle, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Of papers by international writers, and books covering a wide range of other Sherlockian topics.
How many disguises did Sherlock Holmes use?
At Baker Street Irregular.
What were the street Arabs? And how did he get information from his underground network?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 206. Smile when you say that. Hello and welcome back to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we look at the minutiae in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, I would give my eye teeth to have a conversation with you today.
Oh, you don't need to do that. I'll just take a small pack of dental floss.
Oh, make sure you're flossing daily, kids. It's part of what makes the world go round. Well, part of what makes our show go round is listeners like you and the comments we get. If you'd like to email us, simply hit us up at trifles@ihearofsherlock.com. And you can find this episode, if you'd like to comment, right on the webpage at ihose.co/trifles206, all lowercase. That'll take you to SherlockHolmesPodcast.com, where you can look through all of our previous episodes. Make sure you're signed up to get updates when our next episode comes out. It's every Wednesday. You can get email updates. You can get updates on your podcast catcher of choice. We are on all major podcast networks, and we invite you to tell other people about us. The best thing you can do to let other people know about our show is to spread the word, and that makes other Sherlockians happy. So do your part. Well, we want to talk about teeth in this episode. I said smile when you say that was the title of the episode. Well, teeth and the art of detection, Sherlock Holmes going to the dentist, all these things are related. And, do you naturally think, Burt, about teeth when you think about the canon? I mean, is that something that you would pull out? I mean, we know fingerprints, we know footprints, but what about teeth?
Well, teeth, no. I think the simple answer is I don't think about teeth when we talk about the canon. Because unlike contemporary detective stories, there is never any significant data developed by Holmes that's associated with teeth. However, teeth do form an undercurrent in the canon. In fact, I looked earlier and discovered, and the only reason I discovered it today is because I've never looked for it in the past, that the word teeth is mentioned 33 times in the canon.
Huh.
But it's always in some sort of a description, and it's occasionally quite repetitive. So, for example, in Study in Scarlet in the Mormon section, we see little Lucy Ferrier. Her rosy lips were parted, showing the regular line of snow-white teeth within, and a playful smile played over her infantile features. And then later on, Enoch Drebber's teeth chatter. And this goes on through the canon. In the Sign of Four, Thaddeus Sholto Watson tells us nature had given him a pendulous lip and a too visible line of yellow and irregular teeth. And later on, his teeth will be chattering. And occasionally Holmes, according to Watson, says things involving his teeth. So later in Sign of Four, when they're on the Thames in pursuit of the steam launch, Holmes says, Watson writes, "We must catch her," cried Holmes, between his teeth.
Ah.
And then Tonga bares his teeth, and his teeth are awful, and so on and so forth. But in the canon, there is one memorable mention of teeth, and that's in Case of Identity. Do you remember that?
I do. This is one of my favorite entries. This is Holmes and Watson sitting in the sitting room at 221B, and Watson doubting Holmes's skills or Holmes's assessment of fellow man. He said, let me give you an example. Here's the first heading upon which I come in the paper. A husband's cruelty to his wife. There is half a column of print, but I know without reading it, it's all perfectly familiar to me. There is, of course, the other woman, the drink, the push, the blow, the bruise, sympathetic sister or landlady. The crudest of writers couldn't invent something more crude. And Holmes, this is the best comeback ever. He says, "Indeed, your example is an unfortunate one for your argument," said Holmes, taking the paper and glancing his eye down at it. "This is the Dundas separation case, and as it happens, I was engaged in clearing up some small points in connection with it. The husband was a teetotaler. There was no other woman, and the conduct complained of was that he had drifted into the habit of winding up every meal by taking out his false teeth and hurling them at his wife, which you will allow is not an action likely to occur in the imagination of the average storyteller. Take a pinch of snuff, doctor, and acknowledge that I have scored over you in your example."
But that is lovely for so many reasons, not the least of which it's another one of these sort of meta moments where Holmes says, well, here's something that is not likely to occur to the imagination of the average storyteller, but the parenthetical thought here, which, no reader would think about, just except us, at this far removed. Wow. Whoever's putting this together is not the average storyteller.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think, time and again, we come back to Conan Doyle's ability, his skill as a story writer. And just this little nugget within it, as you say, is so meta, in its, approach. And it was almost Conan Doyle's way of winking to us that, he indeed was that level of storyteller. It's funny. As we've said, there aren't many mentions of teeth in the canon. We really don't think about them that much. It's just part of life. The way there are no mentions of lavatories in the canon. Well, I'm sure people still needed to use the facilities. It's just, that was life. But back in those times, in Victorian England, I shudder to imagine what a smile must have looked like from someone. Because let's face it, historically speaking, the British are not known for the presentation of teeth. I remember in an episode of The Simpsons, as someone was threatening Lisa with going to the dentist or the orthodontist, she pulled out the big British book of teeth. And there were horrid smiles from people with yellowed teeth and crooked teeth and all the rest. And it's kind of a trope. But it's not without some kind of foundation. One of the things in dentistry is that teeth will yellow over time from certainly things like coffee and tea, but also from water that is highly mineralized. And when you think about the water available in England, the limestone there, it's very likely that people were drinking unfiltered, mineralized water, hard water, that had its effects on the teeth. Not to mention that dental hygiene wasn't quite as advanced as it is today.
Well, that may be so, but, I tend to think that the fact here is that British teeth have been a subject of satire in the United States for sort of a long time. And that's why you've got this sort of bizarre smile when Mike Myers played Austin Powers. He had this mouthful of teeth manufactured. But I think that, and of course you have the Simpsons and things like that. But I think there isn't any study that shows that anybody has better teeth than the English. But then, studies like that, you've got big differences in the size of populations and so on.
Very true. Very true. Well, we will leave the subjective area of stereotypes, and we will come back here in just a moment with facts about teeth and their role in detection. Stay tuned. Would you read it on a train? Would you read it in the rain? Could you read it in the car? Read it now, wherever you are. Whether on a train, in a car, in the rain, or wherever you are, Mobile Homes is an excellent book to have with you. This volume from the BSI Press is edited by Walter Jaffe, and it takes us on a journey through Victorian transportation. From human-powered vehicles to steam-driven engines, we find examples from the Sherlock Holmes stories from land, sea, and air. Read about various modes of transport that span walking, biking, horse-drawn conveyances, locomotives, ships, boats, and submarines, zeppelins, and more. You could read this on a train. You could take it on a plane. Try Mobile Homes in other ways. Go to BakerStreetIrregulars.com today. We're back, and we're smiling broadly at each other. I don't know if you can see that through your earbuds, but it's a shame this isn't a video show. This is the show where we're talking about teeth and their role in the Sherlock Holmes stories. Now, we know Holmes himself had some experience with regard to tooth loss, don't we?
Yes, absolutely. We hear that he has a tooth knocked out after his altercation with Matthews, who knocked out my left canine in the waiting room at Charing Cross. And among other things, Christopher Morley, in his essay about the blue carbuncle, observed that because of this, he probably had to wear what Morley called falsettos. And therefore, this whole idea of Holmes smoking a curved pipe was probably incorrect. Morley said that Holmes couldn't denture a gooseneck pipe.
That's interesting.
But there's no evidence that Holmes ever had a tooth repaired. I mean, he could have been speaking to Watson and with this glaring gap in his mouth.
That is true. And perhaps Watson was careful enough not to mention it. I don't know about that. I mean, there was a famous piece. It was written for Edgar Smith's Profile by Gaslight in 1944, and later republished in the Baker Street Journal. It was The Dental Holmes by Charles Goodman.
Oh, sure, Charlie. Yes.
On page 85 of Profile by Gaslight. Which was it was a bit of a parody. It was a letter written to Dr. Goodman, essentially by the dentist of Sherlock Holmes. So it was kind of a fanciful retelling. But it was based in the need for Holmes to see the dentist, certainly after getting his tooth knocked out, to have it looked at. And this dentist said that he said that he replaced the tooth. He refixed the tooth in place, which is possible, certainly. If you take great care, if you recover the tooth, and then manage to, treat the wound effectively. But here's the thing. And look, we know Holmes was careful about dental hygiene, right? Because in the Speckled Band, when they were planning an overnight to Stoke Moran, Watson, he suggested that Watson bring his revolver, and he said that and a toothbrush are all I think we need. So even with a short overnight, Holmes was sure to bring along a toothbrush. It wasn't an extended vacation, an extended holiday, but even at the short overnight, he said, bring your toothbrush. So clearly concerned about dental hygiene. So it's likely that he he would have visited the dentist. And when the dentist was trying to save the tooth, well, he would have made an impression of Holmes's palate to see exactly what the tooth looked like, where it fit, etc. And even if he were getting the falsettos that Morley said, there would need to be an impression made. And I think that when Holmes saw the quick-drying compound that the dentist used for capturing that impression, he probably thought, well, how could this apply to my profession, right? How could this be used to take casts of foot impressions or finger impressions? And it's not clear that Holmes ever recognized that dental impressions themselves could be used forensically, because we know now that forensic dentistry is a thing.
Yes, because the pattern of teeth and the marks they make are supposedly distinctive and cute and attentive. Although I think in some cases those data have been disregarded. I mean, particularly where there's wound you to extract after the dental pattern. But I don't know when the first dental impressions, preservations with dental plaster happened. I imagine it probably happened in the late 19th century. I don't know.
Yeah, I would think so. I don't have any records on it, but I do know, if we think about this from a historic perspective, in terms of forensic dentistry in high-profile criminal cases, you recall in 1692, we're crossing the pond here, in 1692 during the Salem witch trials, that one of the accused was said to have bitten his victims. And the bite marks were supposedly the evidence of the crime. And when they were able to take his mouth, his impression, and match it up with the impression left on the young woman's arm, it was clear that it was of a different size. So they weren't necessarily detailed in their look about, well, was this a bicuspid? Was this a molar? Was this an incisor? Etc. But it was, kind of like in Jaws, when the bite radius doesn't fit. That was the first step in ruling out a suspect.
I did look online and happened to find that two interesting things. I mean, one is, according to the National Institutes of Health, a reliable source, the concept of impression making in dentistry began in the mid-1800s when dentists realized the construction of a prosthetic restoration required both a detailed capture of the oral tissues along with stone cast fabrications. But in 1820, the French dentist Delabarre introduced what's believed to be the first impression tray, which was softened wax placed in a small track or cast of white metal or silver, which had a handle on it. And so the dentist would put the soft wax in the tray and then take the impression, which would then, I imagine, be used for the plaster cast.
So it's going to the dentist in those days was a real house of wax.
Yeah, it was in 3D.
Well, amazing progress we've made in the last 100 years or so in dentistry, and it only keeps getting better. And we know that had Sherlock Holmes applied forensic dentistry in his work, he could have easily identified the burned, charred remains of whatever was left in the fire out in Norwood. Remember when Jonas Oldacre tried to make it look as if he had been cremated by John Hector MacFarlane. And Holmes later told Watson that he could use a couple of rabbits as the reference for the bones that were found in the fire. That's always rubbed me the wrong way. That who could confuse human skeletal remains with rabbit remains? But certainly the teeth alone would have given away the game.
Yes, Watson as an experienced and well-educated and highly professional and resourceful physician, would at least have looked at those remains and said, I believe this poor chap was particularly fond of carrots, Holmes.
And Holmes would have said, what's up, Doc? And that is just a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.